And welcome back to Houston Newsmakers, where I'm joined by Dr. John Charles, Chief Scientist of NASA's Human Research Program, Dr. Camille Elaine, Associate Program Scientist in the ISS Program Science Office, and astronaut Dr. Tom Marshburn. In the 60s, it was the moon, and now it's Mars. So that's the focus. What's the challenge in getting to Mars as compared to what was going on earlier in the space program?
Well, the challenge getting to Mars is the fact that it's further away and it takes a longer time to get there, and that if you're sending astronauts, that exposes astronauts to the risks of spaceflight for far longer than the trip to the moon. The trip to the moon in Apollo was 3 days, more or less, to get there, 3 days to get back, and a few days in orbit around the moon or on the surface. We're talking about sending astronauts to Mars on trips that might take 6 or even 8 months just to get there. Mm-hmm. And they have to be in great condition when they arrive so they can work as hard as they've ever worked in their lives on the surface to justify the mission, and then for perhaps up to 18 months, then another 6-month trip back to the Earth just to get back to home and hearth.
And I've always been amazed when I'm watching launches and going on the website how meticulous things are at NASA. You are very meticulous across the board, which you have to be. At what point do you decide to kind of say, well, okay, we're just gonna have to go? Do you ever get to that point?
We test extensively before we get to that point because we have human lives in our hands. So safety is our #1 priority.
Dr. Marshburn, are you interested in going to Mars?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, every astronaut would love to do that. Especially, and for the new astronauts, I come back from the ISS and I say it's a wonderful place to live because of the great work we're able to do up there. We're all sort of workaholics. We all like science, and it is just a wonderful place to be, talking to the investigators on the ground. You're seeing new things every single day up there. That, in my mind, improves the living quality of being in space immensely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to go to a video because I find it always exciting that time just before launch, as you described it too as well. For me, it's the same way. This is a launch that we were first looking at back in December 2014. Let's take a few seconds to watch this.
8, 7, 6,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff at dawn, the dawn of Orion, and a new era of American space exploration.
I love that. It just makes me, and I was watching you, Dr. Marshburn. You were smiling. Just look at that launch.
Just look at that. Oh, absolutely. Wondering what it's like on the inside. Yeah.
Orion, now that was a vehicle that's not going to be the vehicle that's going to take it to Mars. But what's the significance of that particular Mars? What were you trying to test? What was the testing process about Orion and we were trying to look at?
So that was the it was called EFT-1, the Exploration Flight Test 1. Mm-hmm. And as you said, we were testing the capsule and different subsystems in that capsule, the avionics for one, and the heat shield were the 2 subsystems that we were particularly testing on that flight test.
And more recently, I noticed that the system, the SLS, which is the System Launch, help me out with that.
Space Launch System.
See, I threw you off. Right? Space Launch System, and it was massive. It actually fired, and so the test firing, it was a burn of about 8 minutes or so. What's the significance of that when you're wanting to see, I know as you as an astronaut, Tom, in terms of knowing that your boost is never going to go away?
That's right, yeah. So 8.5 minutes, that's about how long it takes to get up to low Earth orbit, but it's a massive amount of weight, more than we've ever tried to get up. So these are big boosters. And some of they're based on a lot of what came from the shuttle, and that's the solid rocket boosters on the shuttle have vibrations I've never felt on any other craft ever. It's just cacophony all around you, all the noise that you feel. It's very exhilarating. And
yet you never run out of people who want to do this crazy stuff. Sit on top of a massive tank of gas and go north. Doctor, talk about the twin study, because that is fascinating to me as well. You have Scott and Mark Kelly, both astronauts, both amazing men, and one went up in space in a long time, and then you were watching, you were comparing, were at the same time? What were you doing with that study?
Well, the fun thing about the twin study was that it was purely as a result of Scott Kelly being assigned to the one-year mission on the space station, because he just happened to have a twin brother, Mark, who was a retired astronaut. And when Scott was announced as the one-year mission crew member, We made a few phone calls and decided that they would be willing to do some coordinated studies between the two of them. So Scott in space and Mark back in Tucson living the free-range life both contributed biomedical specimens, that is blood and urine and saliva and even fecal samples, as well as some performance testing, some testing of the cardiovascular system, some testing of their cognitive functions, some brain scans, to allow us to see the differences between such closely matched, almost genetically identical individuals when one is exposed to the unknowns of spaceflight and the other is exposed to the normal environment here on the Earth. The idea being that we're not going to come up with revolutionary conclusive new findings with just a sample size of 2. And whenever a biologist talks about making measurements, we always talk about how many repetitions, how many samples do we get. One astronaut in space and one astronaut on the ground does not prove much conclusively, but it will show us the areas that are the most likely to be affected by spaceflight, so we can do more detailed studies in the future.
And as you were talking about, Dr. Elaine, it's all about that testing.
That's right.
With all of that testing going on, International Space Station, I was telling you earlier that when I was a kid growing up and if I had some tang, I knew that I was eating something that was a part of the space program, or at least that's what I was told. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I was told. What is it going on now that's involved, that space program's involved in right now, that we on Earth are gaining the benefits from whatever the testing is and process that you're doing?
So a lot of the research has what we call Earth benefits. So particularly in the areas of human health, where we're doing things like growing protein crystals. And protein crystals, we know, are the foundations of the building blocks of life. So we can possibly, by growing crystals in space versus growing them on Earth, be able to grow bigger crystals and identify structures of diseases that we may not be able to identify here on Earth. That in itself could lead to candidate treatments for different diseases. And so that is just one area and one example of how the research we're doing in the area of biology it has a benefit to us here on Earth.
Doctor, as you get ready to continue to wait for the next assignment, what do you tell people about the space program, why it's so important, and why it should still be supported by all of us?
Well, I usually start off on the long list of more examples of Earth benefits, and I could just keep on going. Eventually, I have to stop and say, it is so immense what it has done for not just our country in raising the technical base of our country, but around the world as well. Being a doctor, I'm partial to some of the medical experiments I did up on the space station. One of my favorites was an ultrasound experiment. You know, we have X-ray machines and CAT scans on the ground. Why would we need to explore more about ultrasound? Well, a lot of places on the Earth don't have any kind of diagnostic imaging available to them. Techniques developed by NASA so that astronauts on a remote location like a space station have been the same techniques they've been able to apply to remote locations on the Earth, to include a sports field or a waiting room in a busy inner-city emergency room, which might be an 8-hour wait. That's still kind of remote. So in the regular medical world, they wouldn't. No one's motivated to try to find out what else can ultrasound do. We have to, and we've found out a lot of things that are beneficial to everyone. And that's just one example, and I could keep going if you'd like.
Sky's the limit. Well, time won't permit us. Right. But it sounds like the sky's the limit still for you. You're all very optimistic about what the space program's able to do, correct?
Absolutely.
So.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And you're ready to go to Mars. You didn't hesitate. When I said, are you ready to go? You about a second.
And all my colleagues would say the same.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Well, okay. I'm glad to have people like you around so we can talk to you about it. Thank you so much for being here.
Delighted.
And good luck in your future endeavors with NASA, because everybody needs to know what you're doing and be involved and be supportive. If you all can. Now, before we go, I want you to know if there's anything you want to find out about NASA, about what it's doing, the plans for the future, amazing pictures, video, very easy to make the connection. Go to nasa.gov. You'll find everything you need to get hooked like I have on the mission, more importantly, the men and women in our community who are making a difference for the world.